Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this month's Fireside Chat, where we'll discuss DataSecOps and solving global data security challenges with Sonal Rattan, co-founder and CTO of eXate. I'm, by the way, very excited for the topic and for having Sonal here today with us. For those of you who are new to our events, Adeva's vision is to enable work without boundaries, and our Fireside Chat are part of the effort we take to achieve it, basically by enabling people across the world to learn from technology leaders in leading organizations where they share their personal experiences and the lessons they've learned over the years in the field. And before we start with the discussion, I just want to let you know that you can ask your questions in the Q&A section. We will go through them at the end and try to answer as many as possible. So, Sonal, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for having me.
So when we initially spoke about having this chat, I was really impressed by the story you told me at the beginning. So what made you, join the industry? What made you start with DataSecOps and all of the struggles you've had previously with data privacy? So maybe we can start with that just to ease into the conversation and learn a bit about you as well.
Sure, happy to. So from a background perspective, I started as a software engineer. Eventually, I spent most of my corporate career in banking, spent like many different roles within different types of investment banks and working with highly regulated industry. As a part of my role, it moved into what I realized is that I was a bit of a mediocre developer, but really I was much better at bossing people around. That was like absolutely the best job in the world, I found. But like understanding all the different changes and that were coming in the industry with DevOps and being able to automate and create like agile deliveries, a lot of issues we started to come across when we were trying to like show the bank and digitize one of the banks that I worked for. When we were trying to deploy a 3-month MVP, all we were trying to do is prove out something and fail fast. And that's what we were trying to do from an agile perspective. Something that we developed in 3 months took me over 9 months with many resources to get deployed into production. So instead of like just focusing on like delivering core, using the core values of DevOps to be able to do fast iterations and develop and show value very, very quickly, data was the big prohibiting factor for us. It was trying to deploy a global solution, even internal email addresses as GDPR came into effect and CCPA now is the same. There's certain rules and regulations about what you can and can't do, but as regulations started to tighten up, it became more and more difficult. And just as GDPR kicked in, all of our projects just slowed down. I needed extra resources, and I just thought there had to be a better way than the way that we've been doing it right now, like hiring more people from a operationals and regulatory compliance perspective than actually developers that are experts at what they do. But not only were they learning brand new skills around DevOps, they had to learn all of the regulations and what jurisdictions you can have information and creating distributed systems. All of these things wrapped together absolutely like destroyed any ability to digitize. And that's where the idea of eXate came about, was how do we make it much easier? Surely it can't be that hard.
So can you explain in very simple terms what DataSecOps is? And I'm saying simple terms because for me, this was very new when I was preparing for our chat. And it could be a bit, struggling to understand what the concept is and how it all works. So maybe just, from your perspective and in terms simple enough for everyone to understand.
Sure, yeah, it is as a brand new area. DevOps was, DataOps by itself was only coined at the end of 2019 by Gartner, where it was to look at the different operational aspects of what we need to do as a continuous thing for data. As a part, if you think of it into like how DevOps came about, which was there to take releases down from, which could be like 6-month processes in some organizations, down to intraday. DevSecOps came to support that, because as you're iterating through like releases, understanding vulnerabilities in code, being able to like almost like create pen tests as a part of your pipeline, all of these things became more and more important because every day you hear about a new breach. My daughter was saying, every day there's something about a breach. So what do they want with my data? Possibly what they're going to do with it. But it's big business, obviously, out there. But with DataOps, we saw DataSecOps as to work in tandem with that. We are looking at reducing some of the friction that you have when it comes to doing data operations. If you think about the way that data projects now work, you have, if you're trying to do global projects, you've got many masters of data. You've got your CDO, you've got operations teams, you've got your data stewards. So any large organization will have reams of people just trying to help with data. But it's not just them, it's people who own the data as well. So consent should be a privacy enhancing feature that we can apply to data to see whether or not someone has consented for you to use their data. In regulations such as GDPR, consent for AI profiling, you have to gain consent before you're able to process their data in that manner. So when you're trying to give insights, you're trying to do these things, you need something at your fingertips. Instead of being a regulatory expert, how do you have tools in place to allow you to do basically bring a collaborative tool for everyone to work together? And that's what we see as DataSecOps. It's more of a methodology around bringing everyone together, and us as a tooling look at all of the different siloed systems to be able to allow them to talk together and make sure privacy and security is at the forefront when we're designing applications. So to make privacy by design almost just a normal feature that it's automated and added in without friction.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned DevOps and DevSecOps. Most of us understand how that works. So maybe we can do a quick comparison of the segments of these three and how they compare one to another.
Yeah, so as I was saying, with DataOps, it's predominantly being coined from a lot of the effort that comes from doing big data projects. So when we're looking at analytics projects, there's a lot of complexity. But if you a whole new segment has come out where data engineers are needing to support data scientists. Data scientist is a skill in itself, but they're having to pick up DevOps and all of the different tooling, like learn how to use Kubernetes. Those things, instead of focusing on building models, they're having to do all this other development work. Hence why we see a lot of data engineers now getting into the market to support that as activity. But again, like for having data engineers looking at the whole pipeline, there isn't just the data privacy side that they need to look at. There's the whole part of the operational monitoring and test part that sits as a part of the data ops pipeline, which would be things like looking at like raw data. It's called data wrangling, where we're looking at either denormalizing data or normalizing data. It might be deduplicating information. Those sort of things become, but you want to start automating this. So there's lots of tooling now out there that can help with solving some of those data operational challenges that you might have to before you can get to creating your models that can do the machine learning off the top of that. But as we think of it from a DataSecOps sort of perspective, like privacy needs to be taken into account, security of data needs to be taken into account, be it at rest or in when it's being processed. Consent should be taken into account. There's governance in terms of what jurisdictions are you allowed to process data. Different regulations such as like Schrems 2 is a regulation, was a very famous court case where somebody called Schrems decided that he wanted to, like from Germany, he's a German activist, decided that he wanted to take on Google and Facebook and doesn't want his data to be sent from Europe to the States. Mm-hmm. Which now means that there's more burden on US companies to prove their equivalency. So it's not done at a national level, it's done at a company by company level, which is more burdensome. So when we're looking at having all of these privacy controls in place and having all of that to accelerate some of that equivalency in place, and being able to work with other analytic companies, great analytic companies within the States, then having these sort of tools allows you to get to that equivalency much faster. So that there is where the need comes into the market, where you need the data security side automated, so you don't have to be a regulatory expert to understand that EU data can't go to the States without a certain equivalency in place, or German data can't go to any other jurisdiction because the German Workers' Council says you can't send that information out. So that's where we're automating all of that, so you can focus on building models, doing great things with data, and focusing on the analytics and reducing some of the effort that it takes to be able to deploy solutions by creating something that works in tandem with your tooling.
So what happens, for example, within the organization if they're using DataSecOps and I'm a developer, and what would my role be? How would I interact with this?
So our tooling, so it's a great question. So our goal as a company is that the engineers shouldn't have to do anything apart from know how to use a Docker container. That's it. We as a company are an aggregator of privacy enhancing technologies, and depending on the risk versus the utility and the type of data that you've got, the tooling can work out some of these things for you. The rules are built into an engine. So we have an automated policy engine that will say what information can flow through different jurisdictions. So from an engineer's perspective, as long as he knows how to run a Docker container, he's got all of that tooling that scales over Kubernetes very, very nicely to be able to create a scalable solution that gives them access to all of the different privacy enhancing techniques that are available to them through our platform, but other techniques that would, the whole goal of DataSecOps is to allow these previously really difficult to understand concepts and applications to be available without having to think about it. There's again a lot of challenges with getting it to actually run open source software. There's so much open source software out there, but it's not always straightforward to implement. So these are, you've got a container that is already working, it's ready to go. Nice.
And is it possible to use the concept without using an existing tool? So for example, if I'm a data security expert or an engineer who can implement that within a company, how difficult is it to implement something like that and give it to the engineers in my team to use it?
There's many different, so if you know what type of privacy enhancing technique you need for a particular thing, by all means, there are many tools out there that can help, that even open source software, Google and the TensorFlow and PySys, there are great tools out there that are open source that allow you to have access to different types of privacy enhancing techniques, such as differential privacy or homomorphic encryption. These different types are, if you like, well, we've got PhDs on our team that help us understand how we implement these things and what it means to have an epoch or have how much noise we want, how much we want to perturb data, all of those things, which is not always available. And our view of the world is you shouldn't have to be a PhD in cryptography to be able to use these sort of toolings when everyone needs to use them going forward.
All right.
So so you can, but you need certain expertise to be able to use it, or spend the effort to get to learn it and do it. But absolutely, they will help with the privacy enhancing techniques. But it's then, like, again, building an additional layer to do the orchestration between the different siloed systems that you might have across your data governance landscape. So those are things. So there's a framework called Ageria, which is backed by IBM. ING is a big sponsor for it as well. And it's all around metadata management and creating a framework within companies that talk to data dictionaries, might talk to other security systems, but it's bringing all of that together to be able to really harness the power of being able to use your privacy enhancing technologies that you want to implement. And the other part is, so we look at other tooling such as federated learning as well. We are aggregating it as a service to make it easier to implement, but there's nothing stopping other people to do something similar if they understand the market.
Right. That's very, very useful to understand how everything works under the hood. And I also wanted to ask, what would be like there are companies, large enterprises, especially in heavily regulated industries, where they have to keep their data on site, or they have other regulations to comply to. How does it work with them? Is it as simple as using a Docker container again, or something else needs to happen?
We've done the same thing for so our clients are predominantly in regulated industry. So it's telco, it's banking at the moment. Banking because that's what we know. Probably in hindsight, maybe we should have like looked at different areas, but that we just thought we as a startup ourselves, we thought, oh yeah, this is what we know. Surely it's going to be easy. Absolutely not easy, but overall, it has meant that by working for large regulated industries, we have got a full end-to-end solution now. We laughed about it because like when you're a startup, you build an MVP, you test it out and get product market fit. That's how the industry works. We've had to create a full enterprise level solution in one, like in our first sitting with our technology, but where they've actually and they've been great. So we like one of our investors is ING, which is one of the big banks in Netherlands. Oh, it's across the Nordics actually, but they're big on their data driven journey, and they're seeing a lot of issues around this space. But for them, we're deployed on premise, but they are also using internal clouds, and they're looking at using hybrids of cloud as well. So they are using tooling like OpenShift to be able to have a multi-cloud strategy across the estate. But so our tooling runs on Kubernetes, so it doesn't matter if it's deployed on premise or it's deployed anywhere else. The way our technology works is we provide a hybrid solution, so we can manage metadata as a SaaS service or provide it on premise should that be required. But metadata is usually much lower category and sensitivity. But then we provide a container that just kicks off and runs data wherever, runs any data processing, any anonymization, or any of those techniques that we discussed on premise through that container. That container will do what it needs to, and depending on what amount of resources that are allocated to that container, it will grow and scale over that to be able to process like petabytes of data should it need to. So those are some of the pain things and that we've had to deal with, like add in as a company. But now we're in a position where we can just give a Docker container and have it as something that developers can use, but they can still benefit by not having an entire team to support software that's deployed on premise. So we've added different things into our tooling to ensure that it just becomes less friction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned you're focused mostly on banking. Let's say, what happens if someone in the medical industry, for example, wants to use eXate? How difficult would it be to adapt everything to it?
We've only gone to banking because that's what we knew, but this tooling has been designed to work with any industry because the data challenges are going to be similar across the estate. So we haven't created anything particular just for banking. We've got individuals data sets, but it's expanded to deal with other sensitive like trade information, for example. So it's more started with as a personal, like PII, personally identifiable information, but it has been extended to work with banking. But that at our core is to work with privacy enhancing techniques that can be deployed for any industry. We are doing a project with a telco at the moment, and so again it's moving away from banking, but again highly regulated, and it's fascinating how different companies work. But overall the challenges that we're seeing across the industry are the same. It's not particularly sector specific.
I was thinking about some regulations that are specific for the industry. I know there's HIPAA, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in
Yes.
the medical field. So I was thinking whether there's something you would need to do, for example, to adapt to it, to extend the current software with those different standards, or does it again work out of the box?
It works out the box. So we've taken all of those. So we've got the strictest controls around it, but the way that software can be designed now with our with containers, we have the segregated area. We've got resource and data segregation already in place for this, but we're applying different privacy enhancing techniques depending on policy. So you could have information that is there from a policy perspective to say that we always have to anonymize this data set before we do any analytics on it. And then we will apply different sort of techniques on it, which could be differential privacy. If it's a large data set, we might have to redact information if it's a smaller data set. So all of those things are built into the tool to start off with. But as we say, we also are allowing for other techniques to be added in, and we're adding newer techniques as time progresses. We do something that we believe in as a company is data altruism. So consent is a huge part of what we want to achieve to do more with data, especially the things around COVID, for example, or someone that's got cancer, where if you've got tooling that runs analytics on anonymized data sets, you're almost you're taking some of the thing away from it that you might actually want to share. So if someone has consented, they should be able to consent, and you should be able to use that to make your analytics even better. So redact out the things that so if someone's opted out, absolutely respect their privacy and give them that solution. But if somebody is saying, I've had the most horrific experience, I really want you to use my data for medical research, then use their consent to give that additional information. They're not afraid of re-identification risk at that point. They want you to have that information. Could it be a factor of having 6 children or whatever it might be that could have caused that disease to be worse for them? It's just worth giving some data for that research perspective. We saw it with Israel and with the Pfizer vaccine. Part of that transaction was data. They used their data to say how everyone is dealing with the vaccine, and that information has been spread globally, and that's data for good. So data for good is something that we should be looking to have to add our fingertips. So we bring that into the mix for that.
That's amazing. Back to the technology. So you mentioned earlier about the two separate pieces of working with data and data privacy. So the first one is storing the data, which we touched upon, and then the consuming, sharing, like testing using data on staging environments, for example. So can we talk a bit about what happens in the background, how everything is handled in all of these stages before I use and analyze the data?
Yeah, absolutely. We not only do we believe in aggregating different pets, we also pets being privacy enhancing techniques. I'm so sorry, I'm acronym queen today. I do apologize. Do stop me if I do use another acronym there. We also look at it from a multi-environment strategy. So what you might have with production data might be very, very different with what you have in your QA environment and what you might have in your dev environment. Dev environment, we typically see developers wanting to use subset of information that represents what their actual data looks like. So our tooling has that built into it. So we can look at an existing data set and maybe give them 20% of what the actual volume might be in the production environment, because obviously even though storage is cheap, it can be quite expensive, especially if you've got it on your local machine. So you can take a subset of that data, but you can specify you might want to have certain, say if your distribution is I don't know, 90% is in the States and 10% is in Canada, for example. In that scenario, we could give a distribution that looks like that, so it represents an accurate representation of what your real data looks like. So those sort of tools are available from a dev perspective. We have for QA to sign, so especially in regulated industry, to sign off on a release before it goes into production, you might want to use pseudonymized data. So it's pseudonymization as a form of tokenization. We have pseudonymization and encryption in the technology, but when we look at pseudonymization, it just means that you can have smaller tokens to fit the different fields within databases, for example. In that scenario, but we can ensure that we can apply policy on that to say, okay, the business can sign off on it and they can reconstruct that information, so they can see somebody's position might be if it's a transactional thing, their position nets out at the end and the calculation works. But in production, you might just have clear text data, but you might want to restrict who has access to it from a jurisdictional purpose. So we do look at it from a multi-environment strategy, and we have in our tooling what we call manifests that are defined for different environments. So you can have different things for different environments, and you can have different privacy enhancing techniques for the different environments for that. But when we're looking at data that's being actually processed, if we say we're dealing with a third party, we can protect that information with essentially we can tag it and create a unique footprint for an individual third party, so we can revoke access to it. We can ensure that that data can't be reconstructed again for them. And if it's an internal thing, we can, when we're processing data, it will go through your internal policy to check, am I allowed to use it for this purpose? But again, it's a black box to the developers. This is defined by the people that actually know, and they're in the organization that will say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do that, as opposed to a developer trying to guess what the right answer is, or maybe getting it, even misinterpreting it. As a company, you want to have a standard view on what you can and can't do with information, and what your stance is on your interpretation on that from a legal perspective. So it's bringing all of that policy, those together, depending on what the environment is, whether or not you want people to see certain information, bringing it all together from a data at rest perspective, so it can be in multiple different states, to it being actually processed. We also, right now, our newer versions of our tooling are allowing, so the way that we deploy is on OpenShift or Kubernetes clusters, and we're providing communication between multiple clusters. What we're trying to do there is we're using techniques that, like for some of our clients, they're like, no, that's just way too new for us. But these are techniques that like Apple have been using for many, many years. But things like federated learning are a big part of ensuring that data doesn't actually leave any environment. You can load that data up within that cluster, and it meets all of your policy. But we create the ability for algorithms to go backwards and forwards between different clusters, be it a central node or it being in between each other as well. So another technique is secure multi-party computation. When we're looking at those sort of tools, we can allow clusters to talk without actually sharing data as well. So again, it's there are restrictions on what you can and can't do with data, but here are like some great tools that other companies have put together, or there's open source software that allow these things to happen, to allow you to do more with information overall. So it's just being able to leverage off those easily without having to spend years and years researching it like we have as a company.
Right. And I assume for the data analyst, everything is invisible, like it works just as usual.
Yeah, we've got my last corporate job was in digital, so everything's about making the user experience as easy as possible. So we're big on that, where it's a easy to use interface. You set it up once and then it's an API call. That's it.
That's amazing. We talked already about, how eXate works in the background and the companies that are mostly using it. Is there any specific, maybe kind of like a case study or something that's interesting that you would like to share of a company using your technology?
Yeah, so we openly we can talk about ING because they're one of our investors as well. They liked us so much that they put money into us. That's great. We like that. But with them, we're working on like different anonymization techniques. A big part of, so it's not just them, it's most of our clients that have these same sort of issues where they want to make the experiences for their developers easier. There is a lot of burden that comes with dealing with data, and how are we, so yeah, part of their charter to their staff is, how can we make these things easier for you so you can comply with things that we know, like although I'm passionate about it, I recognize that most of the audience is probably really, really quite bored at like thinking about different privacy and hates those cookies that come up and all of those things. I completely get it. It's not everyone's bag. So it's, again, like taking that burden away. So you can actually, their tech teams can work on the core things that they want to be working on, it's already, you already have to follow so many different policies and do different things. This is just to alleviate some of that and automate it. So that part kind of goes away, and this part is only growing. So privacy, as if you look at the way that the world is going, is only becoming more and more apparent, and more needs around it, more and more restrictions around it. So it's how do we take some of those pain points away? Production over non-production environments is a big one for us. It's taking production data and moving it into, like I said, the QA environments and into the dev environments. That's a big use case that we see a lot. And that's just, again, so we had a case where it took a person a week every month. So they could only take their production database. It take a week to scrub it and like redact out information and anonymize it. So they had scripts, but it was just a painful exercise. And then they will allow the developers to use that. Again, it was completely wasted information. You couldn't do anything with it. You couldn't even work out if everything looks the same. You can't aggregate on it. There's different things that why, from a developer's perspective, why it's not so great. But that's what they had to do. That was policy. You can't work with production data in a non-production environment. So we alleviate that completely. We had that same process done in 5 minutes. Actually, from setup to actually implementing it, it was 5 minutes. So it's just, again, something that it was like a chore. And it was taking that chore so they can work on something more fun.
So how does that work? Do I connect my production database and then export a SQL query, for example, to import it somewhere, or does it work? Do I connect to the eXate tool to use this?
Yeah. Yeah, so what we have is we've got a user interface that allows you to do the discovery on it, and it will like recommend what attributes need to be protected within a particular database, for example. It creates a manifest, which you can either kick off from the tool to say, here's your source and here's your target, and it will go off and it will know from behind the scenes from what your policy is, what information needs to be protected, how. So it then does that job. Usually takes, depending on the size of the database, anything from 3 seconds to 5 minutes, depending on the load that we're pushing through it. And it's protected in your target environment, ready for you. So if it's a subset that we want, again, it's a drop down list, and you want a subset and you get a subset from it. So it's just easy tools to get that working, but we don't integrate in any systems. We will overlay it, but we're using some very, very cool technology behind the scenes. So we're using Spark, which is the standard to use for any sort of ETL, but we're using Delta, which is the new format for Parquet. It allows us to do so much when it comes to huge volumes and working with big data stores, or using S3 buckets, or using Azure Data Lake. We're very, very easy to be able to take our anonymization techniques to the data and then move it to a different target. So we've done a lot of the heavy lifting there to bring it all together. Nice.
We have a question. How long does the policy take to set up?
So it depends. So we're with one of our larger clients. For them, they've manually put the information in at the moment, and that we've done a lot of work to again make that easy to use interface to be able to load information in very, very quickly. So it could be your data dictionary might be one thing that you do. So that's what the attributes might be. What countries do you operate in, and what countries are you allowed to share information with? Who are your data subjects? And we create a unique identifier for them, so we can apply things that consent to it. But where frameworks such as Adeva are in place, where companies are already adopting a metadata framework, then that's automated. We can bring that in, bring it all together, because companies have done a lot of work already to bring they might have put a policy, they may have put it in a system, but it might not talk to anything. So we will consume that, translate it into what we deem as rules, and then we can apply that. So if certain work has already been done within companies, it's very, very quick. Otherwise, we've got a user interface that allows you to do it in stages. So out of the box, you've got the 30 personally identifiable attributes that you might have. But as you progress through your cycle, you might say, okay, I want to just share it within different states within the US. I can't share it with one of the states because one of the states within the US because they don't have a data protection regime in place just yet, for case in point. And in that scenario, you can just do that at a generic level and it will propagate throughout the rest of your rules. So it's, you can be from a day up until, or like fully integrating within all of your systems like Calibras and Informaticas and bringing that information together. Then that's a bigger piece that we work with companies with.
But it's definitely less than 9 months, right?
Oh, absolutely. Everything for us is getting it done as quickly as possible. And because this was something that we just didn't want to deal with. I won't, as a company, as a team within a large organization, this was absolutely the last thing. We wanted to show the cool things that we had a data science team. We were creating great applications for the banks, but we wanted to fail fast to say whether or not these things are going to be wanted by organizations. And we couldn't do that because of the burden that came with data. So that's what we're trying to do. We don't want to add any burden to it. We want it to be quick, easy, have the right people sign off, do a 4-eye check and it's done. And we think that should be the way it works going forward, just to make that pain go away.
Yeah, that's great. And we talked about startups earlier. I mean, yeah. Before we started the webinar. So that's exactly where I imagine this solving a huge pain, especially if, they become more regulated at the early stages, and with all of the data breaches we have lately, that could easily become a disaster. Do you have any opinion, anything you want to share about that area?
Yeah, so a lot of the say in fintechs in particular, where they're selling into banks or they need to have certain things covered, what we're finding is when you've got a startup, you have to focus on the thing that you're good at and prove out that you've got product market fit. That's the way it should be done. So data privacy, and it's burdensome. It definitely is. So companies, as they get to slightly larger stages, will look to do things like ISO 27001, which is getting your compliance around your risk framework around IT. That is the entire thing that you're looking at. So a lot of companies that have to go through this process, but it's really difficult to do. So what we're again looking to do, when you're looking to sell into larger financial institutions, for example, they expect all these standards to be in place. And that's what, when we were saying when we started off with banks, these things need to be in place for them to transact with you or deal with you. If you're a company that wants to deal with European companies, it's in their docs. You have to have data protection in place. What do you do? And have policies in place for it. So if you're as a startup, you don't have that because you've only been focusing on creating this amazing information analytics company, for example, that does things, and you've not factored in those things, they're going to bite you later on because you've got all the ability to sell into a large organization, but you're only to be turned down at the end because you haven't thought through the data protection side of it, because it's in everyone's policy. You can only deal with companies that have equivalent from a data protection perspective. So those, and the challenges are that you then have to deploy on premise, but then you need to make sure that, and it sort of spirals, and the cost becomes quite heavy for startups. So overall, like doing things like DevOps, DevSecOps for sure, DataOps if it's more on the analytics side, and DataSecOps, that those kind of things make a lot of sense when you know that's your target audience. But again, the requirement from a legal perspective to have privacy by design is becoming more and more a part of every country's legislation as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm really looking forward to see how all of this would unfold, and I'm sure that regulations will become more strict as we move forward, and things will change a lot. So definitely something we need is to automate that part and not worry about handling it manually. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up the event? I guess this is it's a new topic, and everyone needs to just wrap their head around it before they're able even to ask something. So let's just wait for a minute if anything else comes up. Is there anything we didn't cover that you would like to share?
As you mentioned around the different regulations come into effect. Well, one of the things that we follow very, very carefully is what's happening in different countries and why are these things actually coming into effect. So India at the moment is coming out with a data regulation, which means that you can only process and store Indian nationals' data on Indian servers. So this, from a political standpoint, is going to be, we're protecting our citizens. We want to ensure the best data privacy and best data protection and put all of these things in our country. And everyone, lots and lots of countries are doing exactly the same. So it's data localization, putting sovereign data walls in place. This it's done for many different reasons. One of the big ones is to get into the cloud game. So if you look at Amazon, like one of the biggest company, but a lot of their revenue is generated by AWS. This is an economic thing as well. So all of the countries want a part of that cloud game, and they want servers in there. It creates jobs. It creates. So it's not just about being great from a data privacy perspective. It's becoming more and more apparent because it's a money maker for different countries as well. It's going to create the jobs. It's going to create infrastructure, all of those things that need to be in place. So it's very, very interesting to actually just see what the space is doing, but it will mean more and more data localization and having to come up with creative ways to be able to work with these different countries. So as I said, it's going to be really fascinating to see what actually happens over the next 10 years around this space and what you can and can't do with data.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I just remembered that we have a client working with medical data and they were deploying to China. So it's the same situation as in India. So they had to spend like 4 or 5 months adapting everything so they're able to deploy the same thing that works out of the box for all of the other countries. So
yeah,
it's an excellent point. We have another question: how companies can measure and demonstrate compliance with data privacy regulations?
So this is the way we do it. Everything is around audit and making sure that you've got information to hand. We audit who's accessing data, who's trying to access data, what data was protected, what environment it's come from, where is it going to. All of that information is what allows you to prove that you're complying with the different data regulations. If you're just being able to show data being blocked from one country to the other, and you can prove it, that's the audit record that we can provide to say information from China is not going into America. So yeah, you can prove and show audit that information was blocked, or certain information that is regulated. So it might just be personal information, but everything else, it was fine. The judgment call was made that was fine, risk accepted, that we can send that information, but you can prove certain attributes were redacted out. That sort of audit is going to help for compliance, but having it in a very, very easy, accessible way, create a report for your CDO and CISOs to be able to show that you are complying. But these things are automated in the tool. It's a case of, we do it like right now. Developers have to do all of these additional logging, etc. This is again taken care of as a part of the service that we provide. But overall, just being able to prove that you're blocking information where it shouldn't be, and you've got full audit around it, and you've got technological controls, is a great way to be able to show that.
Great. One last thing, in terms of incorporating the eXate DevSecOps framework in terms of what do you offer to developers in terms of documentation, tutorials, that kind of things when it comes to incorporating eXate in the DevSecOps?
Yeah, so we've got our information on our website. We're putting a separate area for developers. It's and any sort of documentation that's required. We have white papers on our website that you can go and download. So, and if there is any additional information anyone wants around further, there we can be reached at info@eXate.com.
Perfect. And if there are any other questions that you come up after this, you can also probably direct them to that email, right?
Yes.
The audience can direct them. Perfect. Okay, so, well, thanks everyone for attending, and Sonal, thank you so much again for accepting the invite. This video will be available on YouTube very soon after today. So you can rewatch it, you can share it with your colleagues if needed, and also don't forget to subscribe over there because we have a lot of new cool events lined up as well. And finally, check out the eXate website if anything of this resonated with you. I also noticed that you have a very nice blog that covers all of the new stuff about data privacy regulations and everything, so that should be very helpful for people in the field. And if you're looking to hire remote tech professionals or looking for your next remote job, check out Adeva as well. And that's it for today. So see you again next month. Thank you again, Sonal, so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Sure, it was a pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye.